Good evening and welcome to tonight's webinar, the Western Wales Arable Update. My name is Richard Meredith. I am the Knowledge Exchange Manager at AHDB for the Western Wales, and it's my great pleasure to chair this evening's webinar for you. It goes without saying, as we kick off this, we'd all much rather to be stood in a field chatting to you agronomists and growers this summer, but circumstances don't allow. And so here we are, the new normal. We're going virtual this year. A big thanks to kind of Chloe and Jonathan at ADAS and Mark Wood for joining me tonight. I'm going to do some kind of introductions and housekeeping now, and then we're going to get into the main content of the evening. So we can't hear or see you. You can hear and see us, but we can't hear and see you, which is delightful power shift. But if you want to ask any questions, there's a box. It should be on the right hand side, or if you're on an iPad, on the bottom. Any questions are gratefully received. We'd like these sessions to be as interactive and discussive as possible that this kind of format allows. So putting in any questions or kind of comments about your experience, that's welcomed and throughout. And so the questions will come into me, and obviously we've got the three panelists tonight, and I'll kind of interject them where I can. We'll try and get through everything as much as we can, but yeah, if time allows. Which goes on to the next point, the time. We've got a 90-minute slot for this. We've got about kind of an hour's content to think, and then allow for a bit of time of kind of questions and discussions as we go through. It is recorded, so if you do miss anything or want to see any of the slides again afterwards, or kind of just relive the kind of fun you had this evening, it will be on the YouTube AHDB Cereals and Oilseeds YouTube after we finish, so likely be uploaded tomorrow. Basis and NROSO points are available for attending this tonight. You on your questions box, if you write in your name, your basis or NROSO number, your postcode and your date of birth, that should suffice, and we'll enter those for you. So that's in the questions box, and put all your details in there. So as I think looking at the list of people on this, kind of most of you have been to a AHDB meeting before. As always, start off with a bit of an update. Kind of things have ground to a halt in terms of physical events and what we're able to do, which is a great shame, but it's where we stand now. The main bit of news for our region is the introduction of new monitor farmers in the region. If you see that photo there, you've got on the left, you've got Martin Carr, Jack Hopkins, Adam Lewis, and Rob Beaumont. So they are taking on the Hereford monitor farm. This is the third round to kind of take on the mantle there. We've done the single act, that was Mark on the panel tonight. We've done the duet, and now we're going for the boy band. We're yet to establish which one. Yeah, I think looking at this photo, it could be Boyzone. I'm not sure yet. So that's exciting. We would have typically launched the monitor farm this June, like that. Now we would have opened with a farm walk. Fortunately, we can't. So we're looking at the autumn. We'll do something then to kind of kick off the new program there. I met with the guys yesterday, and they kind of it's really exciting. They've got lots to do, lots they want to get achieved. So all of you local to Herefordshire, that's what the direction of that. So moving on to tonight, we've got three esteemed panelists to discuss everything from the open day site. So like I said, we would have had the open day today, and we now have it on an online format. All three of them have visited the site and had a bit of a chat about kind of what they're going to discuss and what they're going to do. As you'll see in a minute when Chloe explains, it kind of gives us background to the site. There's a lot there, and we've had to pick out areas which we think will be relevant to you, and areas that you kind of would be useful for you all to hear about. We couldn't simply walk around every plot and provide commentary on every single piece, although we will be driven slightly by your questions and your kind of comments coming through. So don't be afraid to ask those. So in terms of introductions, I know kind of some of you are local, so you'll know these guys, but I know looking at the list, there's some names I don't recognise on there, and people we haven't possibly interacted with before. So ask our panel all to briefly introduce themselves, and I'll start with you, Mark Wood. Mark, over to you.
Thank you, Richard. Good evening, everybody. I'm Mark Wood, farm manager on a arable and beef estate farm down near Ross and Wye in Herefordshire. Our main focus is on combinable crops in our arable enterprise, so most things that can go through a combine. We've also got a commercial grain store, so we store local farmers' grain. I struggle to believe it, but I am retired as a monitor farm. I'm way too young. And I've since moved on to be an AHDB board member. Got a particular interest in variable costs, hence why I've been roped into this. And my role tonight is to be the good-looking one on the panel, but also to ask the questions of ADAS on behalf of farmers.
That's why I led with you. Next up, Chloe Morgan. Can I ask you to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Chloe Morgan. I work for ADAS as an arable crop pathologist. I've worked there now for nearly 3 years, straight out of university. I do quite a lot of work, so I help organise the open days and also run the Rosemont Farmers Association, so I do quite a lot of work with local farmers. I'm born and bred in the Herefordshire countryside.
Perfect, thank you, Chloe. And I have to kind of credit Chloe, the other three of us here have kind of we've turned up tonight and done a bit of discussing. Chloe has actually designed and implemented everything that's gone on the trial site, which would have been for our open day. And thank you, Chloe, for doing that. And kind of it's been a hard year, and it's tough that we didn't get to execute it in the end. But thank you for doing such another amazing job on the site this year. Finally, Jonathan Blake, and I'll hand over to you to introduce yourself. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Yes, and good evening, everyone. Yeah, I'm Jonathan Blake. I'm an Associate Director of Crop Protection at ADAS. I've been at ADAS Rosemont now for 19 years, primarily focusing on cereal disease management. But I'm also a farmer and an agronomist, and I have an interest in varieties, which is probably why he's got me to talk about varieties here this evening. So that's probably it from me. Thank you.
Fantastic. So that's our panel. What could go wrong? To give you a bit of an idea of what kind of, it's going to be quite a loose discussion, and we've met up and we've looked at the site, and we've kind of picked out some areas we want to discuss as we go through. Loosely, to give you a feel of what kind of order those are going to be. First of all, we're going to do the kind of look at the variety plots and what we took out of those. Then there's a yellow rust demonstration. Then we're going to chat about Septoria. Then finally, we're going to look at agronomic strategies, and then before we close with any kind of questions or discussion points that we want to do. I just need to point out a couple of AHDB admin. There's a development with the recommended list. You'll remember, those of you who attended cereals, we used to have those Pocketbooks for each different variety. Those have now gone on to an app. I'm not just saying this, but I'm pleased to say it's quite an easy to use app, and it's a good step forward for the recommended list. For those of you with Androids and Apple phones, that's if you go to the store where you get your apps, and then you can download that. You can have all the different varieties at your fingertips, and you can make notes on different ones as you go through. It's good to have in the field. It's good to use, and it's nice and light and easy to use. So please make sure you use that. Also, this is on a web-based thing. So if you type into say Google AHDB variety selection tool, there is a variety selection tool which allows you to use this recommended list data to make some suggestions on what to grow on your farm. So you can be putting in the different kind of agronomic features that you'd like to see in a variety that relate to your business and your area, and it can tell you from the statistics coming out of the recommended list what would be suitable for you. And it also kind of allows you to tailor with kind of what input system you'd be looking at, kind of high, medium or low input, and it kind of makes some suggestions for you there. So that's me done with the AHDB stuff. We're going to move on to, as I mentioned, first of all, the variety plots, and kind of run through some of those. I think the first thing to kind of to ask about is kind of, I mentioned that Chloe she's the mastermind between getting this site together, and this photo is actually of an aerial photo of the site and what the plots we're looking at. It's up in North Herefordshire, and it's kindly hosted by Adam Lewis, who is one of the new Herefordshire monitor farmers. We're very sad that Adam put a bit of effort in planning where we could go and what we were going to do, and now we're on a computer. But we're very grateful to Adam for allowing us to do that, and thank you, Adam. But Chloe, over to you. Just a bit of kind of background to the site of what we've got here, and yeah, over to you.
Thanks. Yeah, it's a shame you couldn't be there today, but I'm going to try and bring it to you virtually. So this is a drone photo of the site. You can see at the bottom of the image there, we've got the recommended list varieties. So the very bottom line is completely untreated, and then above that, the varieties are all treated with a full spray fungicide program. You can see quite clearly from the drone image, we've got a good level of rust in this field this season. And by the yellow plots there, some varieties got hit harder than others. So we'll go into that in a bit more detail shortly. We've also got a yellow rust demonstration. So at the top of the image there, you can see some plots with a different amount of yellow in them. And those have all had different fungicides and different actives applied. So we're testing their efficacy against yellow rust. We've also got a small variety fungicide demonstration looking at Septoria. So it's based on the AHDB ADAS agronomy trial. It's been running now for 5 years. But we've got some elation, illicit and firefly, and they've got different fungicides applied. So we've had an untreated strategy and a low, medium and high input strategy to look at the interaction between variety and fungicide. So yeah, lots to look at tonight. So I'll pass you back to Richard.
Perfect, thank you. That leads me into kind of our preamble into when we get into the varieties, and what we're going to do is start off with picking out. So what we've done prior to this is pick out good talking points and good varieties which are commonly used in the Western Wales region, and kind of drawn them out. If you've got any other questions about anything else, we can try our best, but it's from that side, it's important to recognise for our panel's sake that there's a lot going on there, and we can't bring out every intricate detail of each, but we've tried our best to pick out what would be useful for you. I'm going to kick off by asking Mark, who is farmer and do your own agronomy. When you are choosing a variety for your business, what kind of factors are you bringing in? What factors are you considering before you put that variety in the ground? If you could just kind of give us a bit of a background to that.
What I'm looking at to start with, there are so many varieties out there, so many marketing campaigns, what have you. You can get yourself very lost. So I try to keep it very simple, and my starting point is what market am I growing for? So am I trying to grow bread wheat, or am I trying to grow feed wheat? And for me around here, it's very much feed wheat. We've grown milling in the past, but by the time you've paid the haulage, the premiums on the whole are so hit and miss that it's not justifiable for us. So our end market is to feed a chicken or a cow, really. So that's the starting point. I then start to use it as the beginning of a risk management strategy for growing a crop of wheat. And for me, disease is very important, and the time of planting and everything else. But there's one problem I know in the west of England I'm always going to get, and that's most difficult to control, and that's Septoria. And this is brought home, especially by the loss of actives that we've had, whether it be chlorthalonil, the loss of the efficacy of some of the triazoles and SDHIs, etc., etc. So Septoria is becoming more difficult. So we do focus on more higher ratings, so as it gives us a chance, so we can try and then tailor the strategy a bit further. I feel that the ratings numbers are key, but you do have to take them with a pinch of salt, because occasionally in some years there's a breakdown. But I feel that Septoria is the absolute key. The other diseases, I feel with a balanced strategy I can manage. And then thirdly, on all of that list, it comes down to date of sowing. with a few acres to plant, we need to spread our sowing out over a longer period of time. So we need some that will suit early sowing, some that suit late sowing. And I find the recommended lists are a starting point, but it's vital to see how it grows in your area. So these local trial days are vital. It's such a shame we can't go up there and tramp round Adam's farm, because it was very interesting. The trials were very well put together, and hopefully today we'll show you some of the bits you see interpreting those recommended lists into reality of what grows well in the West. Back to you, Richard.
Thank you, Mark. So by my reckoning, our first variety that we're going to go through, Group 1, Skyfall. Right. Okay, and I'm going to state we've got quite a bit to going to get through, as you can appreciate. So I'm going to be quite militant about how we do it. And I've never been known for being bossy, but I might be tonight. So so Jonathan, hand over to you. Skyfall at the site. What first observations and comments on here?
Thanks, Richard. Yeah, no, what we've done, I should just start by saying, well, we've narrowed it down to a group of 13 varieties, a baker's dozen, to focus on those that are most relevant, with Mark's main concern being, or one of his main concerns being septoria management, and with a lot of chlorothalonil, actually finding varieties that are resistant to septoria is the first step, I think, in helping to control this pathogen in the absence of chlorothalonil. We've been able to grow much more susceptible varieties in the past, but the turning to more resistant varieties now seems a very logical step. So we've tended to err on the side of those that fit that category of being more resistant. There are others out there you can grow. They are things you may wish to grow under certain circumstances, and that's absolutely fine. But these are the ones we've kind of picked out. Skyfall's the first up here. And I mean, as Mark said, I mean, it's a feed wheat county, Herefordshire generally. That said, there are a number of varieties out there that fall into that category of being, you could say, premium killers for milling wheat, because they're almost yielding the same as feed wheat varieties, and they have quite good quality aspects. And I mean, Skyfall started as that. It's probably a little bit off the pace now in terms of yield at 97. I mean, some of the highest yielding now are up at 105 on the RL. So that's about an 8% difference. But it's got some good attributes, and it's been a very popular milling wheat, both in Herefordshire and elsewhere, as people just see it as a sound, solid wheat to grow. It stands well. It's got a good disease profile. The one thing it does get, and we touched on it earlier, yellow rust. It is a weaker variety for yellow rust. Actually, in terms of yellow rust, there's been some huge changes in the profile of the RL on yellow rust this last year, and I think in some respects, Skyfall isn't looking as bad as some of the others now, but that's just an artifact of the season, and we'll perhaps talk a bit more about that later on. But Skyfall is one we actually compare quite closely with the next variety, Zyatt, and these two I think you can consider. I mean, Skyfall is the established milling wheat. Zyatt would be the new kid on the block, so to speak. Very similar in terms of grain quality, perhaps not quite the grain quality of Skyfall, but it's 2% higher yielding. And at 99 on the list, that's quite a similar yield to some of the lower yielding Group 4 feeds. And when you look at it like that, and actually if you look at the spec of Zyatt and compare it to something like Dunston or Costello, well, you'd have to say if it was a Group 4 feed, you might consider it. So it's a Group 1, why wouldn't you? There's a potential for a bit of a premium there, potentially if you get it right and the market allows. So I can see why people that do grow milling wheats in this area, and the profile isn't bad. This variety calls itself a 7 for yellow rust. It might be, but it certainly does get yellow rust. And we have seen that as a bit of an issue this year, especially in some of the latest sowings of it.
I mean, consideration does need to be made to, if you are going to get the premiums, you've got to put the extra inputs in, and the extra nitrogen that's needed, and combining and everything else. So it falls into the package, and it's identifying that market for, if there is any chance of it, it's very good to have a go for the premium, and it falls back, and the yields stack up reasonably well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I agree. Should we look at the Group 2s Richard, thank you. I mean, yeah, a couple of Group 2s here that we've pulled out. Siskin has been a very popular variety and still is. I think it's still increasing in popularity as a Group 2, but I think it's been grown primarily as a feed around here. At 101 on the list, it's, you know, it's up there with many of the other feed wheats that we're growing, and it's got a reasonably good profile with specific rates.
Had to be
myself to turn my phone off. Yeah, its standing ability is one of its weaknesses, though. 6 and 7s for standing. It is, as are some of the other varieties out there, 9 for yellow rust, and that's to its credit. But at 6.6 for Septoria, you can see why people are choosing that variety in this area. It's a reasonably resistant variety to grow. And yeah, we compare that quite closely with Extase. Extase is a slightly different variety. It's a more forward. It tends to be slightly ahead of most other varieties on the RL in that respect. I think it's to do with its French parentage. It's got a very good specific weight and an astounding Septoria resistance rating. And I think this is probably one of the most interesting varieties that we have on the RL at the moment, especially for this side of the country. 8.1 for Septoria. It's one that a lot of people, I think, will be looking to grow this year. If it has one weakness, it's eye spot. It's a 4 for eye spot. That said, there are a lot of other varieties that are 4 for eye spot on the list. But yeah, other than that, it's not really got much weakness. It's not one for early sowing, though. It will get ahead of itself. It is a rapidly developing variety, and it really needs to be held back. You need to hold this back till October, really, I think.
So you mentioned eye spot, Jonathan. Is eye spot, there's several varieties on the list that are 4s, and there's even a 3 on there. Is eye spot something we should be worried about as growers, or is it a manageable disease that can be controlled in other ways?
That's a very good question. I mean, eye spot, I would say, it's not something we can completely control chemically. We can reduce it through a couple of different fungicides. Bosclid, prothioconazole, both have activity, but we can't fully control it with those. Rotation and how we grow a variety can make a huge difference, though. Second wheats are always more prone. Heavier soils are more prone in earlier sowings. Equally, actually, and counterintuitively, actually ploughing tends to promote eye spot more than tilling. So if you are looking to grow varieties that are 4, I think to be putting them in situations that are less likely to get eye spot, later sowings, lighter soils, in tilling situations perhaps, may help to combat that pathogen so that we don't need to interject chemically. There are, as I said, the fungicides as well that can help. I think when we start looking at 3s for eye spot, and there are several 3s either on the recommended list or as candidates. Now, there's even a 2 I noticed. When we start looking at those, I think you've got to be very careful how you grow those, because I don't think it's a problem that's necessarily going to go away. I don't think the cultural control or the chemical control may do enough there.
But it's just going back to the Septoria potential of Extase. It's given something we started growing this year, and it's amazing how clean it is, and it gives you a real chance to adapt your management strategy during the year. But I would say also it is a late driller. It definitely needs growing in the end of the season.
Yeah, that's one you're planning to grow next year, Mark, is it?
Yes, it is. We've got some in the ground this year. Looks probably our best looking wheat. If it was just for show, then it would definitely win. Whether it yields, we'll see when it goes through the combine. But it's a variety that really helps us along, if you know what I mean. It's that next stage along, so it's very good as a late driller, as I say.
Yeah, excellent.
Mark, what are your views on? There's a lot of the kind of the psychology behind it. I think they kind of do you feel that kind of will be drilling, a lot of people will be drilling too early this year after last year kind of had their fingers burnt. have you? What are your thoughts on that? How are you going to sit on your hands and hold off a bit longer than you want to? Do you think?
Farmers are their own worst enemies, but there's no point in developing a policy just on one season. You can adapt yourself, but don't run this season how you would have done last season, because it could be completely different. It could be a really dry autumn and really suit that late sowing. And there's so many other factors rather than just wet weather. Sowing, if you've got blackgrass and you're sowing wheat in the second week of September, you're going to be ploughing it up because you can't control it. So it's having that balance and learning some lessons from this time, and maybe improving your drill capacity, or maybe going a few days earlier to be able to get in, but actually having the quality seed bed, sowing at the right time and everything, it feeds into so much more. If you do go a lot of early sowing, you're going to have BYDV, you're going to have a lot more septoria, so on and so forth. There's so many other problems it could lead to. So it's having that balanced approach.
And Jonathan, kind of Extase has been kind of held like a new kid on the block in the kind of terms of the recommended list and varieties coming on. But kind of one question that's come in here from Martin Williams, you'll be pleased to hear. He's saying how long can we trust these new varieties? He points out that many are kind of one-hit wonders. Where do you where your thoughts lie on that, Ben?
It's a very good point, and yes, we do. We should be cautious of new varieties. Not all live up to expectations. It's surprising how often the past varieties that have been used and sold out at cereals has been the caption before, with a whole host of varieties. And it's surprising how often 3 or 4 years later down the line they faded into the background and not really taken off. I think Extase now, it's been out there for a year or two, and it seems to have stood up pretty well, and it looks like it's going in the right direction. I don't think anybody would suggest you should be planting your whole farm in any one variety. I think it is about having a mix to spread that risk, so that if there is one that isn't living up to expectations, it's not accounting for a huge area of your ground. But having varieties is what it's about.
The way we develop ours is we'll have our trusted varieties that are doing really well on the farm, but we'll always look for a new variety. It's like Extase this year. We're not growing vast quantities of it, but we're trying it, and actually it suits. So we'll have another go with it next year, learn some lessons and develop it. And it might be in a couple of years' time that Extase is the benchmark of our varieties and what have you, and you carry on moving forward, but you don't just change everything on a good advertising campaign at cereals.
Other shows are available. Before we move on to Extase, just to interject a comment on here. One grower mentioned that kind of in a no-till environment, that Extase has worked as a good variety that's worked well in that environment as well. So yeah, so there are plenty of options there. I think the next one up, my guess is Firefly. So Jonathan, thoughts on Firefly?
Thanks, Richard. Yeah, no, we included this because it just looks like, I realise it's a group feed, and people might not necessarily be growing specifically for that market, but at 102 on the list, it's got a yield comparable to most feed varieties, and it's one of those slow standing varieties. It's one that you can plant reasonably early, and it's got a good resistance to septoria. It's up at 7, and although its specific weight isn't that strong, it's not a bad variety all around, I think. I would say its yellow rust rating very definitely isn't a 9. I'm cutting against the RL at that point. It may be all lists as a 9, but it very definitely gets yellow rust. I should say that the UK CPVS identified there were between 10 and 12 new varieties or new strains of yellow rust out there at the moment, and clearly that is changing the profile of many of these varieties, and Firefly certainly gets yellow rust, and I know a few growers that have struggled to contain yellow rust in it this year. Hasn't been too badly affected at this site, but we could find yellow rust in there as well.
Mark, you mentioned at the beginning when I asked you what kind of factors you take in, and one of the kind of key ones was, have you got a market for it? Group 3s, what are your opinions of Group 3s in the west of England? Out on my travels, I don't see much of it kind of grown. Is there a reason for that? Are we lacking that market on our doorstep?
We haven't got the biscuit makers across here. The demand for that sort of wheat and the haulage across to Northampton or somewhere like that, or onto a boat would probably kill the job of any premium. But I wouldn't rule Firefly out, because it's a good option as an early driller. So with yield of 102, it's a very good yielding variety. And if you want something for an early drilling slot and you think you can control the yellow rust, it's quite good. I also understand it's quite good at after maize, and it's quite good with fusarium later on. So probably don't grow it for the biscuit premium of £2, £3, £4, £5, whatever it might be, but actually grow it on its agronomic benefits.
A question for either of you that's coming from the panels, that kind of this chap said we're looking for a Graham replacement, but Graham consistently out yields Extase in the southwest. Could Firefly be a replacement for it, kind of due to its early planting? What's your thoughts?
I would say it's got potential, but try a bit. If Extase isn't working for you in your farm situation, try a little bit of something else. And if Graham's working for you, still keep that as your bedrock of your variety, and try little bits of others to see where the next replacement is. Because I'm sure Graham will become outdated, because we all do, and all varieties do, and what have you. So it'd be good to have that next Graham as such lined up, ready to go. I don't know what you think, Jonathan.
Yeah, that's a good question, Mark. I don't think we have a clear answer to that at the moment. I don't think there are a huge number of new varieties coming through that are clear winners. Certainly the new candidates, they all seem to have a weakness or two. And actually, Graham stacks up pretty well at the moment, and it's a tried and tested variety. So it's hard to see why you might want to replace it at this stage. I think it certainly looks a strong candidate, or strong variety all around. Yeah, Firefly, as Mark said, it may be one to try.
Perfect. Right, so if I had a band in my office, I'd ask for a drum roll. I think we're going to go to the group fours, which is what we're kind of leading up to, and probably the predominant group grown in the west of England. Saki.
Yes, yeah, no, thanks, Richard. Yeah, we included this. In some respects, it's a similar type of variety to Firefly, in that it's also a very slow developing variety. It can be sown quite early, it stands well, it's got a good resistance to septoria. There is a question mark over new varieties always with disease ratings, and we don't actually have a rating for eye spot for this yet, which is a bit of a concern. We actually did find eye spot in the plot whilst we were stood there yesterday. And its specific weight isn't fantastic, but it yielded 104 for one of those earlier planting varieties. If you haven't got major problems with blackgrass and you are looking to get in early, that could be a variety that might well suit you.
I mean, this and the next variety are very much the new kids on the block, and as Martin Williams said earlier, it could be they break down, but it's worth maybe looking and trying a bit if it seems like a package that might suit. So you try a little bit of it. It's got very good septoria. It might fill that early drilling slot, but without all that data out, it is a risk. And also being a new variety, there's probably going to be a limited amount of seed, so it might be it's too expensive to really try it.
When we were chatting yesterday, I made note you guys were mentioning that kind of this wouldn't be a place that you'd want to put too late in the rotation in front of rape.
Yes, it's a variety that's quite slow, a little bit like Revelation. I think it's +3 on the RL for speed of development, which means it could be one that yeah, you're wanting to get off, but it isn't quite ready yet, especially if you're trying to sow rape after wheat.
So then we move on to Gleam.
Yeah, I mean, Gleam, that's been a consistent performer, I think. A lot of people have been growing this, and it seems to be increasing in area. It doesn't stand out, I don't feel, as it's sort of showy wheat, I wouldn't say. But actually, it doesn't really stand out in the numbers, but it seems like a solid performer. 103 stands reasonably well. Septoria at 6.3 is very acceptable. I would say it's another variety, a little bit like Firefly, that clearly does get yellow rust. It's a 7. You might think 7's a good rating for yellow rust, but this gets yellow rust. We have had some problems with that in some parts of the country, probably more because it's caught people out and they weren't expecting it than anything else. But yeah, I don't know if you have any views on Gleam, Mark.
We do grow Gleam. We've tried it for a couple of years now, and as you say, it's not a showy wheat. It does help fill the barn, but it's probably overshadowed by the Grahams, and I think there's others coming through. So it's an uninspiring variety, but it does do a good job. So I found it quite reasonable. We've kept the yellow rust out. We haven't seen any in there. Just with a standard program, we didn't specifically treat for yellow rust. So knowing that bit of a weakness, you can adapt your program to suit it. But I probably might be looking to drop this and try something else in our package of varieties.
Mark, I've had a question in about when what choices you're making with your crop choices. I mean, when what's your threshold of with the ratings with Septoria and yellow rust? When would you say no, that's not the right that's not the right level for me? Where would you draw the line?
I know I'm unfashionable, I've been told it many times, but everybody's got very excited and about yellow rust. But for us, our situation here, yellow rust isn't a problem. So yellow rust doesn't concern me. I probably wouldn't have grown an Oakley with a 2 or a 3. I think it ended up on a yellow rust, but that's not my consideration. I don't want to be growing lower than a 6 for Septoria. Below 6.5, it's got to be a good all-round variety. I think our lowest rating is the next variety up, which is Graham, but actually it fills a barn. Even though it's a lower rating, it just seems to cope with it, if you know what I mean, and we manage it. So I wouldn't be going lower than the 6.8 probably of the Graham.
Okay. Just before we move on to the next variety, just to interject, Stephen Harrison down in Bath, if it's the same Stephen Harrison, I think it's just mentioned that kind of Gleam's performing well as a second wheat on the farms he's working in. So that's another point to add in. Next up, we've got Graham. Jonathan.
No, it's a good point Stephen raises about Gleam, although I mean I must admit with the amount of first wheats that went in last year, I think the number of second wheats might be quite limited next year. But Graham, an outstanding variety for the area. It's not suited all parts of the country. It seems to particularly suit the west of England, where its yield seems to be 2 or 3% above that seen in the east. Good specific weight. I think Mark's touched on it already. We've really covered this variety already. I think it's 6.8 for Septoria. It's probably slipping a little bit for Septoria, I think. Certainly where we've seen thick crops of this in trials last year, it certainly does get Septoria and can be a problem. But yeah, it looks a really sound variety that continues to deliver.
Mark, your Graham plays a big part in your rotation. How did you agronomy wise? How did you treat it this year? Did it have a T3 in the end?
No T3, but we started the program with we didn't put a T0 on because it was early sown. This was sown before all that lovely rain we had around about the 17th, 18th of September, I think it was. So it was early sown, so there was a bit more disease in it. It had a reasonable T1, and that was based on Aviator and Bravo, and then it had our standard T2, and then didn't have T3. But the disease was held. There was just a little bit in there, so that's why we went with a more robust T1.
So someone's mentioned here that Graham doesn't stand as well as it reads and can get juvenile yellow rust, but it does end up yielding very well in the west, which I think is why it sums up the story of why it's a popular one. But kind of coming back to that, we kind of touched on it earlier. What as an alternative for Graham going forward? What is there anything kind of, Jonathan and Mark, what kind of excite you? What are your opinion?
I would probably, I've used Graham, and Jonathan was strongly criticising me yesterday as a bit of an early driller. It's the first one we put in. It seems to suit that situation on our lighter ground. So I would be looking to swap that with another early driller, whether it's a Firefly or a Saki or something like that. But I'm not going to throw it out because it's still, last year it filled the barns, and I think it looks very promising this year. So we'll try a little bit of one of those early drillers this season and see where it takes us.
Perfect. All right. Dunston.
Yes, this is one of the varieties Mark wanted us to put up. And it's one of those ones that seems to have fallen worse than most. I mean, as Mark said, he looked at the variety selection tool to scan a few varieties, and when you look at that, it does come up with this as a potentially good, interesting variety for this part of the world. And I think it's why actually it's quite good to go out and see trials, because yellow rust has been a problem for this variety. This has turned yellow, and controlling yellow rust in Dunston has been a challenge. It looks fine untreatable, fairly fine. Even actually where we've applied T1 and T2, it came in at T1.5, came in leaf 2 and caused quite a bit of damage. So yeah, beware if you are looking to grow Dunston, that is a threat with it. I think with its yield down at 99, although its septoria rating is quite good, I think it's probably one that's looking more outclassed now, especially with that yellow rust rating looking a very shaky 7.
The reason, just to give the background, the reason it was included was AHDB got their new selection tool, which was came up, and you put in your criteria, and for the west of England, Septoria, and putting in a few other criteria, there was Extase, Gleam, and Dunston that came up. So we thought we'd test it out, and actually this goes to prove why you need to go and see how it grows locally, whether it's local trials or information from your agronomist, what have you. So it just shows that it's a very good tool online, but actually needs a bit of sense checking in your local area, and this is why it's here. I was quite horrified to see yellow rust that bad in a treated plot. On the right hand side photo is treated, and it was stark how bad it was up there. So, and that was 2 full treatments of Revistar, I think, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. Yeah, we had a robust Revistar-based treatment to try and cut out septoria in the theory that it would be a septoria year. But yes, no, indeed, it's no discredit to the Revistar there. It's just yellow rust cycles differently to the septoria. It moves more quickly, and a standard septoria program often isn't quite enough.
Well, Martin's asking here, how does it hold a rating of 7 with this going on and this showing us? What do you think?
The changes happen too quickly for the RL to adjust. This is the recommended list came out in December, and it's broken down in this season to yellow rust. So it's, the RL is based on last year's variety trials, quite rightly. It has to be based on something.
Sundance.
Okay, Sundance. Yeah, I mean, favorite. Indeed. I mean, it's got a fantastic septoria rating. Its yield is perhaps a little off the pace now, but this is, I think, paired with another variety that we have here coming up next. But the one weakness or 2 weaknesses about Sundance really are its specific weight and its eye spot rating. 73.9. It's likely to incur penalties in some instances where that's grown. And an eye spot rating of 3, to me, is a reason not to grow a variety. But its septoria rating has been outstanding and has been a very popular variety, and it's been widely grown for that reason. Not one for sowing.
We were growing it last year, and it looked fantastic. You'd always look to enter that into a competition. It looked like the next variety you were going to show, but it looked stunning. But actually, when it got in the barn, you'd have a big pile of it, but it was almost unsaleable with the specific weight. And you'd need to be growing some Costello to mix in with it, so as you could actually send it to a feed home, because it was very light Pacific weight, which caused a lot of problems.
Yeah.
Stephen Harrison's commented on there that it's got weak straw even with the full eye spot program. Add in there.
Yeah. No, indeed. I mean, I think Theodore. Sorry, go on.
Oh, beg your pardon. I've missed one by mistake. I think I pressed the button too many times.
Sorry, I thought you were trying to hurry us along. Mark mentioned Costello just now. At specific weight of 80.7 is the outstanding feature of Costello, and a yield of 101. You can see why people grow this variety. Very solid, robust, good stander. I mean, I guess that could be one that you consider akin to Graham if you're looking for an alternative. It's perhaps not quite got the yield, but with a specific way like that, it's going to add something in terms of quality to your store. And this septoria at 6.1 is very good. Good eye spot rating compared to many. and it doesn't seem to get yellow rust as well. So it's one of the few that isn't plagued by that problem.
But
Mark,
it's
I've
not
made
a
a comment.
very,
Yeah, go on.
not a very good looking variety. You're not going to win any competitions with it because there's a lot of chlorotic spotting on the leaves. You look at it and you see these spots on the leaves and you think, oh my God, what's happening here? Is it scorch? Is it this, that, the other? And it doesn't. It still yields. It still fills the trailers. Very impressive when you see the trailers coming off and the tractors crawling along. But I think this variety is coming along to overtake this now.
Finally,
skip back to Theodore. Yeah, I mean, this is
Theodore.
probably most akin to the Sundance we've just seen, actually, in some respects, in that it's a kind of 2% up on yield from that variety, but it stands better. It seems to be a better stander. It's a beautiful looking variety. If Mark's looking to win competitions, this would be the one to win it with. But it certainly looks very pretty. It's got a fantastic septoria rating of 8.2 as well. We don't know everything about the variety. It's not got an eye spot rating, for instance, yet. It doesn't seem to get yellow rust, though. The only thing we could find in there yesterday was a bit of mildew. That's probably because it was being kept so green by its other resistance ratings, but it does look a really interesting variety. The problem will be for many will be specific weight. I think if it was up in the 75s or 76s, that would be a variety that would be attracting a lot of people. It probably will be more limited given that specific weight.
Mark, if when you'd visited the site, if you were out crop judging, how would have this fared in your opinion?
It looks stunning. It was clean top to bottom. It really looked good. As Jonathan said, so the specific weight is the one worry. I think I might be growing a field of this by my neighbour's farm at Tump Farm just to make him look jealous. But whether it will come through and be a full part of it, after growing Sundance, it's very difficult getting rid of low specific weight wheat. Would be my concern.
In a more livestock area, Stephen's also commented there's a good variety for whole cropping as well. And going back to Costello, Anthony Wade's mentioned that plenty of reports from other regions of yellow rust on Costello, so it's not.
Okay, right, yeah. Thank you for that. That's useful to know. It's always good to get additional information. One variety we didn't have in the demonstration, but it's worth a mention because I think it's a game changer in the future. I know Mark's got an interest in this, and Wolverine is a candidate on the RO at the moment. It's not actually recommended yet, but it's got a unique feature in that it's got BYDV resistance. And we've had this before where varieties have been developed with pest resistance. Oakley, I think, was the first we had with resistance to orange wheat blossom midge. And that has gradually led to a whole host of varieties with orange wheat blossom midge resistance. And I think it's fair to say this is the first probably of many, I suspect, as we gradually move to a situation where hopefully all varieties can have this sort of resistance. Because this, in the absence of neonics, means we don't have to apply an insecticide in the autumn. And that's got to be all round. I think that what's interesting to me as well, this variety as a candidate, even if it didn't have BYDV resistance, seems to have a profile that would be good enough probably to get it registered as a recommended list variety. So even without that, it's a good variety. It's got a 7 for septoria, and everything looks good about it at the moment. As I said, it's only a candidate. I think the amount of seed out there means only not everybody will be able to get their hands on it, and it'll be one people to possibly try a little bit of if they can get hold of it. But yeah, it looks a really interesting change. I don't know if you want to say something like that, Mark.
It's a good example of risk management, of managing problems you might have. Richard asked earlier about should we all go out early drilling. Well, if you are and you haven't got deter, you've either got to use insecticides to control the aphids with BYDV, or this might give you another management tool. So I'm not saying it's the perfect candidate or anything, but it was just an interesting concept going forward. Interestingly, the breeders are putting an area payment on it. So if you grow it, you do have to pay an additional fee, which they've equated back to the deter dressings, as I understand. But it's something we're going to try a little bit of it. I believe there's only a couple of 100 tons of seed in the country, but whether it works or not, I don't know. But it's an interesting concept.
There's a comment on the box here from outside perspective of in the northeast that Sally Eggerton said she saw the Wolverine in Yorkshire today, and it was full of yellow rust. So it goes to show the region specificness of this. I've been asking the questions as we go through, but I'll still put the photo of not embarrassing photo, but the photo of Mark up on the site. That's him next to the Theodore, looking very pleased for that. We'll move on now swiftly onto the various demonstrations that were going alongside the variety trials. As kind of to kind of lead us into that, Mark, in terms of your fungicide use and quite a mild winter that we've had with a severe lack of frost, how would you describe your tailored approach to the 2020 season?
I'm lucky I haven't got an agronomist to fall out with or anything, but this season, looking at it, you came in thinking mild wet winter, it's going to be horrendous for Septoria, but it suddenly changed, and we responded to that, and we've managed to be able to reduce our fungicide spend and tailor it to what we were seeing. So our lowest spend for this year was £46.51 on fungicides, and our highest was 74, where we needed that early Graham and what have you. Last year, as you'll see later on, our average spend was about £105, which is quite a lot, but there was a lot of disease coming in later on, which we were trying to protect against. So it's striking that balance and judging the drier weather. We weren't seeing the disease, shorter crops, and also the reduced yield potential. We're not trying to protect a 12, 13, 14 tonne a hectare crop. We're doing probably 7.5 to 10 tonnes. So you adjust it to that yield potential, because we've lost tillers with the dry. We've had a poor establishment in certain places with the wet winter and everything else. So it's managing it and tailoring it to the potential of the crop and what disease is there and the weather that's prevalent. I don't know what you think, Jonathan.
No, I agree. I think you've said the most important factors there. You have to tailor it, and the risk management factor is an interesting one, isn't it? Just how do we judge how to adjust our programs? There's a lot of scaremongering goes out in the industry about how we should dare we cut back on our inputs, or I think it's a difficult conversation to have that needs to happen between agronomist and farmer to make sure a balanced approach to risk management is taken, and the risk is shared between farmer and agronomist. And if that happens, there's scope, I think, to be more precise about our fungicide inputs to make sure we're controlling disease but not overspending.
So do we base too many decisions on fear, backed up by the negative advertising of what we might lose, but done by the chemical companies, when really we should be taking more of that risk approach, risk managed approach, and working with the agronomists and the data we have, and actually having a team effort communicating to try and do what's best for the crop?
I think it definitely should be the latter approach. I mean, how much by Project Fear, as you like, is an interesting concept, but I think, yes, there's definitely scope for being more precise about how we, I think sometimes we under apply where we've got susceptible varieties so early. It's quite easy to get caught out. I think Chloe will talk a little bit about variety and fungicide input later, but certainly on some of the more resistant varieties so late, we've got some quite clear evidence out there that suggests we don't need to apply as much as I think sometimes.
But there's got to be that mentality, I think, that we won't get it right every time, and you try and take that managed approach and accept that you won't get it right every time, and learn from those lessons.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think yes, there might be 1 year in 10 where you under apply, but if you're on average across those years outright, then probably your margins will reflect that over a period of time.
Right. At this stage, we'll kind of shift the dynamic, and Chloe will hand over to you to lead us through the various demonstrations we're going to look at after the crop varieties. So Chloe, over to you.
Thanks, Richard. Yeah, so we'll start with the yellow rust demonstration. As we've heard, yellow rust has been quite a problem this year in several different varieties and cropping up in areas we didn't expect. This is largely down to the temperatures that we've had this season. So if you look at the graph on the left there, this is showing the average daily maximum temperature for each month from March until June. So the blue bars there are the temperatures in 2020, and the orange line is the long-term mean from the Met Office. As you can see, in each of those months, we were above average, particularly in April and May. Yellow rust thrives in temperatures sort of between 10 and 20 degrees C. So these temperatures have allowed it to sort of get going and have been really conducive for it. On the right there, you can also see some research from Peter Ladders, and he did a paper looking at the different factors that affect yellow rust. One of those was the number of frosts that you get below -5 degrees C. And the axis there is the percentage of crops affected. I've got several different categories, but you can see if you get no frost, more crops are affected by yellow rust than where you get 1 to 5 or 6 to 10 with a further reduction. I think it's safe to say some areas of the UK this year didn't really receive a frost that was below 5 degrees C this winter. And so again, that yellow rust hasn't been checked, resulted in some issues in a few crops. So if we move on, I'll talk about the yellow rust demonstration that we've got in the field. So this trial was designed to really test these products. It's quite a harsh environment. We've chosen Myriad, which is a 4 for yellow rust and has now been dropped from the recommended list. And then we applied 2 applications of the same treatment list. The first at growth stage 32 on the 2nd of May, and the second at growth stage 37 on the 13th of May. And as I say, the treatment list is designed to really pull out differences between the treatments. We've applied these timings to apply the products onto 2 leaf layers, so leaf 3 and leaf 2, and to really draw out the differences. So if we just look through the treatment list, we've obviously got an untreated to gauge how high the pressure was. And then we've got 4 different azoles to compare, all applied at half rate. I'm sure you'll be familiar with most of them. Methyltriptyconazole is our newer azole. We know it's really good against septoria, so this is commonly known as Revysol, and it's the azole that's in Revistar XE. And yeah, it's really good against septoria, but we also wanted to see how it fared against yellow rust and how much it was adding when it's applying that mixture with Revistar. We've also then got 2 strobilurins, which are commonly used to control yellow rust, 2 SDHIs in Imtrex and Elatus Plus, and then 4 mixtures at the bottom there, where we're mixing actives applied at almost commercial rates, just to see how they compare. So if we move on, we've got some photos of each of these plots, so you can see what levels of disease we saw. And in the untreated, we got a good level of yellow rust. You can see a lot of scarring, which is this time of year, the yellow rust isn't really active anymore because it's controlled by very high temperatures, but it leaves behind this scarring, so dead leaf tissue, making it look orange or brown leaves. There's very little green leaf area remaining. If you move on to the next plot where we can see tebuconazole, so this is applied as Legend, and it's done a pretty good job actually. It's achieved a very good level of control compared to that untreated, that has maintained a lot more green leaf area. Just compare that to the next one, which is prothioconazole. This wasn't quite as strong as tebuconazole, but it has reduced the level of disease compared to the untreated again. But you have still got some scarring, particularly on the flag leaf there. And you can see the yellow at the top of the plots. We move on to the next azole, which is metaconazole in the form of Sunog Pro. This one sort of sits in between the other 2 azoles. It wasn't quite as strong as tebuconazole, but it did slightly better than Prothio. And you can see that in the images. It's got a good level of green leaf area remaining, but some scarring at the top there. And then if we move on to the last azole, Irisa or methyltriptyconazole, better known as Revysol. And this has achieved a good level of activity against rust if you compare that to the untreated. Remember, this is a really harsh test on our chemistry, but it's not achieved complete control, so it does need something with it there just to boost it. I'd say it's looks similar to Proline in that respect. And if we move on to the next group, so we've got the strobilurins. Here we've got Amistar. Again, it's achieved a pretty good level of control, although there was still some scarring in there. And these this is one of the products that's quite commonly used to top up disease control. If we move on to the next one, you've got the comparison here with Comet. Actually, we thought in these plots, Amistar looks slightly better, which is perhaps not what you'd expect. Note the rate of Comet here is slightly lower than half rate, whereas Amistar was half rate, as we used Comet 200. But even so, they looked quite comparable here, so perhaps they're starting to look closer than we thought. And then finally, if we just move on to the mixed, the SDHI, sorry. So the first one is Imtrex, so that's your flux peroxide. And again, it's achieved pretty good control on its own and performing better than the strobilurins. The plots looked pretty green, although there was some low level of scarring in the crop, but it did a pretty good job. And then finally, the last SDHI and the last of our solo products, got the Elatus Plus. So this is benzovindiflupyr, which is the SDHI in the Elatus era. Applied on its own, again, it gave a good level of control, but there was still some visible scarring in the plots. And so yeah, not too bad. And then we've got the mixtures. Finally, so Ascra X-Spray. Again, this looks really green. The mixture here of the bixafen, fluropyran and thiaconazole working well together to maintain that green leaf area. Move on to the next one. We've got Elatus era. This looks slightly better and it's well known for being good against rusts. It does give good control, the mixture there of the addition of thiaconazole to the benzovindiflupyr. And it's maintained quite a lot of green leaf area in the crop there, slightly more than Ascra. Then Revistar XE, so this is your fluxaperoxide and methane-trifluconazole. Actually, together these have worked well and achieved a really good level of control when you pair them together. As you can see by the photos, there's not much visible scarring left. And then finally, we move on to Librax. So that's fluxaperoxide and metconazole. And again, it's achieved a good level of control in that mixture, and perhaps a bit more scarring in this plot. But these last four mixture combinations were all quite difficult to pull apart, I think. The last era perhaps looked slightly better, but they all did a pretty good job. What were your thoughts on that, Mark?
I thought it was an excellent trial you'd put together, Chloe. I've never seen a yellow rust demonstration like that in the west of England. So it was stark. And I think apart from our old friend tebuconazole, it was the mixtures that showed up. All of the straights seemed to do a job, but not anything too exciting. So I think the mixtures were a lot more exciting, and the quality control was a lot better on there. And it just showed that a well-balanced plan that you might have put in for Septoria with a little bit of tweaking can also sort out your yellow rust on what is a very, very susceptible variety there. So I thought it was very good and a very good trial. So well done.
Thanks. Yeah, it did show you didn't need to alter your program too much, and perhaps tebuconazole could act quite well as a booster of disease control, or put in as a T1.5 if you are struggling to control the level of yellow rust in there.
A lot of people get very excited about a T1.5 and want to spend lots of money, but just your demonstration, I think in a well-balanced program, a 1.5 of half a litre of Teb would stop any yellow rust marching up. So I don't know what Jonathan thinks to that.
Yeah, Jonathan, were there any surprises for you in this demonstration?
Sorry, what was that, Richard?
Were there any surprises for you in this demonstration?
Well, not really. And I think it's nice to be able to look at the solos, because we never quite know what marketing approach will come. Certainly some of the new chemistries are being put within twin packs with other chemistries that if we can't break it down to the actual actives, we don't quite know what we're getting and what it will do on diseases. And it's nice to have a look at them independently. I don't think there's any great surprises. It's quite reassuring, I think, that methane looks quite similar to prothioconazole in terms of activity. But yeah, as Mark said, you know, tebuconazole together does a very good job. Whilst we still have it for a while yet, it works. So it's a good option in the half timing.
Perfect.
Yeah, it's important with the rust to stay alert, control the rust, and save your crops, a bit like coronavirus, right?
Good stuff.
So Septoria in the wet west, Chloe, what do you think?
Yeah, so Septoria has been less of an issue this year, as we've touched, largely due to the level of rainfall we've received, as Mark sort of mentioned. I think once it stopped raining in March, it then went very dry. We had a few episodes in April, but May in particular was extremely dry, with only 1.6 millimetres recorded at the Rosemont wet weather station. And that's quite a key period for Septoria. You know, the crop's extending, and you're producing the last 3 yield-forming leaves. And if you get rainfall during May, then it will splash any Septoria in your crop up onto those yield-forming leaves. But it has been quite dry. A lot of the crops I've seen, Septoria sort of stayed down onto leaves 4 and 5. Perhaps in more susceptible varieties, Elation, Karen, I've seen low levels on leaf 3, but generally not been a big issue this year. And we saw that at the site. We've got some plots of Elation, Illicit and Firefly, as I mentioned, with the different levels of input from fungicides. And to be honest, we couldn't see much difference between them at this stage. So we won't go into those. But I think we might see more Septoria coming through. We've had some rainfall in June, and it's looking similar to the long-term average. So we might start to see more Septoria, although it shouldn't really be too much of an issue commercially. It's quite late in the season now to start affecting your yields. But we did see some results last season. So if we move on, I'll just briefly talk about the AHDB and BASF agronomy trial. So this is part of a project that's been running for 5 years now. And we're looking at sowing date, variety and fungicide, and sort of the interaction between the three for when you're controlling Septoria. So we drilled the plots at 2 sowing dates, mid-October and mid-September. And this drone image of the trial showed really well the differences between those 2 sowing dates. You can see in mid-September, the plots are much browner, some struggling to retain any GLA. Compared to mid-October, you've got a lot of green leaf area remaining, quite green plots. And that's purely just because when you're sowing later, the Septoria gets into the crop a bit later, and therefore starts the whole cycle later into the season, resulting in lower disease levels. If you just move on to the next slide, we should have some data here from leaf 1 on that trial on the 11th of July. Last season was a higher disease season. We had low pressure early season, but then a lot of rainfall towards the end of May and into June, and this resulted in high disease pressure later on. And we saw that in our trials. So here again, you can see the effect of sowing date. There's less disease on leaf 1 in the mid-September sown plots, whatever the variety. But also quite clearly, you can see the benefit of a resistant variety here. The disease scores there on the untreated, so the blue bars in each variety really reflect their ratings. Santiago being a more susceptible variety at 60% on leaf 1 and sown early. Hardwick, a more intermediate variety, you've got about 50%. And then Graham down to 20% when sown early, and even lower when it's sown late. And then when you look at the fungicides on top of that, so this trial had an untreated treatment, low input, which was based on chlorothalonil, so bear that in mind because we've lost it. But the medium, we then had chlorothalonil and Brutus, so we had an azole. And then the high strategy, we had chlorothalonil with Brutus and Imtrex. So the idea was we're building and seeing whether we need the addition of those extra fungicide additions at the end. And as you'd expect, the Santiago gave quite a big response to the fungicides, seeing the benefit from a high input strategy, particularly in the early sown crop. But Graham less so in the early sown crop. Perhaps a medium is pretty similar to the high there. In the late sown crop, actually, there wasn't much difference between any of the strategies. So clearly some differences in sowing dates and varieties there and the interaction between the two. If we move on to the yield results, these are quite similar and sort of reflect the disease data really. Obviously you get a bigger response in your yield from Santiago from fungicides, less so from Graham, so that in the mid-October sown Graham, actually the medium programme was higher, gave a higher yield than the high. And you just sort of make sure that when you're applying fungicides, you want to try and get the yield back to cover your costs. It's quite a difficult thing to judge, and that's why last season we also ran a fungicide challenge. So if we move on to the next slide, we again used Graham, and we asked entrants to send in their fungicide programs for a crop in a field that was a plot trial. So they got updates on the crop, and they sent in their programs about a week before each application was due to be applied. And then we applied them, ADAS applied them to the plots. We then took the yields and worked out the margins. It was a really interesting trial just to see which programs did give you the biggest margins. And we put in an untreated, so that didn't cost anything. But we also put in a blockbuster program, which is a belt and braces approach. It was quite an expensive program at £188. And actually the margin was less than the untreated. So in that situation, you'd be better doing nothing. You can over apply and be too risk adverse. And obviously the higher fungicide spend did result in slightly higher yields generally. But the biggest margin was achieved by the ADAS experts with a margin of cost spent of £95, closely followed by Mark with a spend of 105. So you can see why Jonathan and Mark maybe put this slide in. But it was a really interesting trial to see how that came out. And we're doing this again this season. So if we move on, we're working with the AHDB monitor farm groups, and we've got 3 trials this year. This is just some of the fungicide spends from the trial in the west. So it's based at Mark Wood's farm on Graham. And just here to show you the difference really in the spend that our entrants have done for the same crop. So the blockbuster approach was £207, the ADAS expert was 63, and the entrants range really from 67 to 105. So it'll be really interesting to see how in a low pressure year those margins look. I don't know if Jonathan and Mark have anything to add on Septoria.
I think it's an excellent, that set of slides just demonstrates very simply how there is potential to tailor your fungicide spend with the different varieties, if you know what I mean. So if you're growing something like Graham, and especially if you sow it later, there is great potential to be able to cut back on what you're applying. So I think it was a good set of slides that summed up what Jonathan has been talking about all the way through.
Yeah, no, I agree with Mark. I mean, I think there's a lack of information to help growers decide exactly what their spend should be in different scenarios and different varieties. We have a heck of a lot of work out there looking at the most susceptible varieties to pull differences apart, and that's useful to understand the chemistry, but in reality, it's not what many growers are doing. So I think pieces of work like this, I think, are a great way of just working out where we should be in terms of the optimum. If we understand where the edge is and where the optimum is, we can then adjust and add a level of risk management to that, but we need to know where that edge is as well.
I think it was very good, and you learnt a lot, and especially the discussions that went with it. I have just had a message from Martin Williams asking which entrant number he was, and I'm sure he was entrant number 4. I'm certain of that. But on a serious note, this year probably the hardest fungicide decision I found was at T3. And whether to put one on or not. We're going through a dry period, and it's a long time till harvest. How late should you be applying a T3, and what are your thoughts on this year, Jonathan?
It's a good question. I mean, there's 3 reasons for applying a T3, some of which aren't really relevant this year. I mean, top-up Septoria control is one factor that people cover at T3 sometimes. These days, and that's often with something like Mancozeb or possibly prothioconazole that will help a little on Septoria. So there's Septoria, there's top-up brown rust control, and on some varieties that can be a major problem. Lily, Crusoe, for example, to name just a couple. But there's also Fusarium, and the weather did turn showery around the time things started to flower. I don't think we had a lot of rain actually during flowering, especially in South Herefordshire. You probably your crops are probably dusted by the time the main wet weather occurred in the last week or so. So in some respects, we probably missed the fusarium risk. I don't think if you've applied a robust program up until T2, or even just a robust T2 application, you're going to see Septoria as a major problem, especially given the varieties you're growing. We might, in trials, we might have a sufficiently interesting epidemic from a trials perspective on susceptible varieties, but yeah, I think Septoria, unless brown rust's an issue, I suspect you're probably fairly safe without a T3 this year.
So a lot of the chemical companies, when advertising their products in low disease years, are very keen on the greening effects, and you should still apply full rates because it'll make your crop look green and win prizes and whatever else they're saying. Do you stand by these claims, or what are your thoughts, Jonathan?
The biggest greening effects are usually as a result of stopping the browning effect, the dying of the crop to disease. I mean, that's what we saw with strawberries. The greening effects were reported in 2002 and 2003 in a season which was conducive to that, and due to outstanding disease control. And that was when strawberries still worked on septoria. And that outstanding disease control, I think, was probably having the biggest effect on greening. When we lost the activity of strawberries on septoria in 2004 and 5, that faded, and we haven't really seen strong physiological effects from those chemistries since. There have been occasions where we've seen something, and they still do something on disease. I think primarily they're linked to disease control. It may be disease control that we're not catching, it may be at a subclinical level, but I think that they're linked to disease control more than anything else.
So looking forward to the new season, Jonathan, there's talk through the trade and what have you that because farmers didn't drill all their acreage last year, there's up to 25% of the wheat seed still left on farm. So the farmer who's got the bag of seed and had a rat walking around the bag and whatever else, what should he be thinking about before drilling that treated seed that he bought in last year?
I mean, the first thing he needs to be thinking about is doing a germination test on it, isn't it? I mean, seed treatments, especially insecticide seed treatments in the past, but some others as well, can have a negative effect on germination. So, you know, where that seed has been treated and left in a bag, it's probably will have lost more of its percentage establishment. But doing a germination test is the first step. But also, even when you've done that, I think I probably would use a higher seed rate than you might conventionally use, because year-old seed tends not to have the same vigor. So if the seed bed isn't perfect, or if some of those seeds are dropping deeper in the seed bed, then they may not emerge quite as well. They may emerge more slowly. They may not have the get up and go that a new seed would have. So yeah, consider your seed rate.
So we've touched on it before about losing multi-sites like chlorthalonil and what have you. What's your view looking right the way forward to next season? And I know our ADAS scientists don't like looking forward. They are very good at judging data that's happened the previous season. But how should we as a grower be looking at the multi-sites and viewing it for next year? Are Folpet and Mancozeb any good?
Yes, I mean, they are alternatives. They're not either of them, and neither claim to be as strong as chlorothalonil. And they both come, I think especially Folpet is a little bit more expensive too. I think both are multi-sites we should be considering to include in the programme. No doubt of it. They have a benefit this side of the country, especially where septoria is the main problem. And I don't think that, but we need to know that they're not going to provide as much disease control. So I think that's why we need to be looking at varieties that are more resistant, because that is effectively loading in a multi-site to your variety program, to your fungicide program. It's adding a level of insurance that will help us keep crops clean. I don't think it's acceptable to say, oh, I'm going to grow relation and gravity and just rely on the SDHIs, because quite frankly, I don't think the chemistry is probably good enough to fully control disease on some of those more susceptible varieties in high pressure seasons.
So you're almost advising that integrated pest management approach of everything to try and tackle this big problem of septoria.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't think there's a huge penalty to be paid here by choosing varieties that are a little bit less prone to septoria. So to me, it's an obvious choice to go down that route of trying to select a variety that's, as you say, is a 6 or greater, or a high 5 or above, to make sure that we're the right side of the line and not leaving ourselves with a problem come spring. As I said, I mean, yes, we can look at high rates of new chemistries, but timings need to be spot on, and septoria can be very difficult to control on those varieties this side, and more difficult with the chlorothalonil. I don't think we've quite realised just what an impact the loss of chlorothalonil will have on our septoria programs. And
Jonathan, I've got a couple of questions here, and I'm going to bundle them together because a few of them are on the same similar vein. First up is there's a couple. 3 questions on T3s in spring wheat. I'll pick out the one from Tom Rees, the Pembrokeshire Monitor Farmers, asked that. Good to hear from you, Tom. I didn't realise they had internet in Pembrokeshire, so it's good to hear you there. Question for Jonathan: if you had a good-looking spring wheat just flowering, what sort of T3 would you be putting on? And this is from Tom in the best septoria growing county in the UK.
So much about something to be proud of, is it?
They haven't got much else to be proud of.
I mean, your side of the country, Tom, you're going to get, yeah, I mean, fusarium can be a problem. I wouldn't be too worried about septoria in spring wheat, because even in your part of the world, septoria isn't usually a big problem in the spring wheat. It takes longer than that to build up. But I think I would be looking down a robust T3 if your crop's just starting to flower. I mean, the cheap and cheerful route that many take, and many have taken this year, it would be a mancozeb-hebiconazole on a standard winter wheat in the east. I think your part of the country, you might want to look down a prothioconazole-tebuconazole mix. That's probably the most robust combination. Something around about applying a half dose of prothioconazole, perhaps topping it up with a bit of tebicon as well. And that should give you reasonable control. You're never going to get 100% control. Fusarium is one of those pathogens you can't get 100% control. And actually, we have seen a bit of fusarium already. We saw a little bit in the Crusoe up at Adam Lewis's yesterday. So that, you know, it is starting to come in. And yeah, it's possible even that early rainfall around the 3rd of June was sufficiently enough to, we had a wet day, might have allowed it in some places.
I suppose the biggest question for Tom is if it's further than 5 miles away from home, he can't actually travel to go and spray it with the COVID regulations in Wales.
We digress. It's good that you should mention Adam Lewis, because he's just submitted a question as well. Could we manipulate disease susceptibility by adjusting nitrogen rates both in totals applied or by multiple lower application rates? Thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, nitrogen does drive disease. Any organic grower will tell you that where they grow organic wheats, they don't tend to have disease and the same problem. It drives both rusts and septoria, and both are more prevalent in highly fertilized crops. We have an optimum for nitrogen. You can get there by applying little and often approaches. I'm not sure that's probably going to make a large difference. It might make a small difference. It's not like a large difference to your septoria management plans, though, I shouldn't think. But yes, applying less will reduce your septoria.
With the old adage, there was a lot of research done into canopy management. Would that come into play? So you're actually keeping that canopy at a certain size so it's not too lush, or do you promote more the lush big crop to try and provide that yield, as Yen would be suggesting in more modern research?
That's a good question, Mark. I mean, yeah, the old canopy management approach did prevent us getting too large a canopy, and that was a reasonable approach to disease management. It was not going to be a cure-all, but not having a crop too lush certainly does help. Yeah, the factors they found within Yen, this association between canopy size and yield, I think it's an association, and I wouldn't necessarily personally read too much into that. I don't think that's necessarily the right way forward, and can result in a lot of lodging, which has the biggest effect on yield probably. So I'd be nervous of taking too much of that approach. I think we need to actually be closer to perhaps some of that older research on canopy management. I think it's the right way forward.
Jonathan, do you feel that, sorry, next question. Do you feel that Inatrek, if I pronounce that right?
Yes, yeah, that's a fungicide.
Is that a step forward from Revysol?
Both new chemistries, but Inatrek isn't actually registered for use yet. I think it may well be by next spring. We hope so. It's another development of a number of new developments that are coming through the pipeline, which is reassuring, because we're not going to have the resistance management tools in quite the same way that we had. Chlorothalonil has been brilliant at extending the life of new chemistry as it comes through. yeah, I don't think, I mean, we're in a position to say it's better or worse than Revysol. It's a different fungicide. It's a different mode of action, which is interesting. I mean, Revysol is an azole, and we've got other azoles, but this is actually a different mode of action. So it's offering something different, I think it's fair to say. May well complement rather than be a direct competitor.
Perfect. I think if that's all the questions, if there's anything else coming through, I think we'll draw it to a close there, as we're just coming up to the end of our allotted time, and we've done it bang on nearly. Right, so all that leads me to do to close this evening is had a fantastic evening. Thank you to our panel for bringing some life and some reality to the trials we've got. As I mentioned at the beginning, we'd love to have you all in the field, but this is we've made the best of what we can do, and I think we've done a fantastic job. Thank you to all of you for putting this on for us this evening. I'm sorry to the Pembrokeshire growers that I've insulted, and I'm sure that they'll remind me on a regular basis throughout. So yeah, the thank yous go to Adam Lewis. Thank you for hosting the trials. We wouldn't be able to do that without him. And looking forward to the Monster Farm program with Adam and co. Also, there's a person hidden in the background called Michelle Nuttall, who's my colleague, and Michelle's been kind of, if everything goes wrong, she's the insurance person to cut in and save the day. So thank you, Michelle. You can't see her, but she's been very helpful in putting on tonight. Finally, I'd like to thank Mark, Chloe, and Jonathan for coming together tonight and discussing and providing some honest and independent commentary of what we've seen. As always, kind of any of us, I'm sure, would be happy to chat to you if you kind of had any other specific questions. And I think lots of you got most of you should have my email address if you had the invite to this. So I'm happy to field anything, and I'm sure the panel would as well if there's anything kind of burning in your mind. All that leaves me to do really is kind of to wish you all a kind of a safe and productive harvest, and I really do look forward to seeing you all in the autumn again when we go back to what the new normal is. So thank you very much, and thank you for attending and for your interaction. Good night. Thank you.
Cheers, Richard. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard.
Thank you very much.